When you look into the eyes of someone you despise, have you ever wondered what you're truly seeing? Hatred feels direct, personal, justified. Yet beneath its surface lies a reflection, one that rarely points outward. Hatred is not born in the world around us. It is forged in the silent corners of the psyche, where everything we deny about ourselves waits patiently to be seen. The mirror of hatred does not lie. It simply shows us what we have tried to bury. We live in a constant dance between the self we show and the self we hide. The mind, in its endless need to appear strong and moral, pushes away everything that contradicts its image. Every unacknowledged fear, every forbidden desire, every unhealed wound becomes too heavy to hold consciously. So we cast it into the dark. But the unconscious does not stay silent. It searches for expression, for projection, for a stage upon which to reveal its hidden contents. And the most convenient screen it finds is often another human being. That is where the mirror begins to work. When we encounter in others what we secretly despise in ourselves, an instinctive aversion rises. We see arrogance, and something inside us burns. We see weakness, and we feel contempt. We see dishonesty, and we rush to condemn. Yet, if we look deeper, we may realize that these are not mere observations. They are reflections. We are seeing ourselves through the guise of the other. Hatred becomes a mirror polished by repression, reflecting what we refuse to acknowledge within. It is a painful truth because it demands humility to admit that what we hate in another may live in us feels unbearable to the ego. The ego thrives on separation, on the illusion of being better, cleaner, more righteous. Hatred, therefore, becomes its favorite disguise, a tool to maintain distance from its own flaws. By hating others, we create a false sense of purity. We project our darkness outward so that we may continue believing in our light. But what we cast out does not disappear. It grows in the shadows, feeding on denial, gaining power with every act of avoidance. The mirror of hatred operates quietly, without permission. It doesn't ask if we are ready to see. It shows us, through conflict and emotion, what we most resist. This is why hatred feels magnetic. There's a strange fascination in despising someone. It binds us to them energetically, pulling our attention again and again. We think we want distance, yet we can't stop returning to the thought of them. This is not obsession with the other, it is fixation with our own reflection. The psyche is trying to complete a loop, to reintegrate what it has split apart. When hatred erupts, it reveals the depth of our inner fragmentation. It shows that the self is not whole. For every judgment cast outward, there is a dissound aspect inward. We despise the liar because we've lied and hated ourselves for it. We condemn the manipulator because we, too, have twisted truth to survive. We mock the coward because we remember our own fear too vividly. Each hatred is a confession in disguise, an unconscious admission that something within remains unresolved. And yet, this realization need not shame us. It can free us. For in seeing the mirror clearly, we begin to understand that hatred is not evil. It is information. It is the psyche's brutal honesty pointing toward what requires integration. Every emotional reaction is a signpost. The stronger the hatred, the deeper the repression. What we resist seeing within ourselves, life will keep showing us through others until the lesson is finally met. When we meet hatred with awareness rather than reaction, something subtle shifts. The mirror begins to reveal not just the reflection, but the origin of the reflection. We start to recognize the wounds beneath our rage, the insecurities beneath our judgments. The person we hate becomes, paradoxically, our teacher. They embody the parts of ourselves waiting to return home. This doesn't mean condoning harm or abandoning discernment. It means seeing with clarity rather than blindness. The moment we see clearly, the emotional charge begins to dissolve. The projection loses its grip. What once felt like an enemy becomes a reflection of our own unfinished work. The journey through the mirror of hatred is uncomfortable because it dismantles our illusions. It forces us to face the raw truth that we are not separate from the darkness we condemn. Every act of hatred, whether inward or outward, fractures the soul further. But awareness gathers those fragments again. To recognize the mirror is to take back our power, to stop scattering our energy across endless battles with reflections. Only then can hatred lose its purpose, revealing itself as a distorted form of self-recognition that has been yearning all along. To be understood, hatred does not begin as hatred. It begins as pain, raw, silent, unprocessed pain that was never given permission to speak. Before it hardens into contempt, before it sharpens into anger, it trembles as hurt. Somewhere in the hidden corridors of the psyche, something broke. A trust, a connection, a sense of safety. The wound was left open, and the soul, unable to heal, learned to protect itself through armor. That armor eventually became what we now recognize as hatred. Every burst of anger, every rejection of another, every deep resentment carries within it the echo of a wound that once cried out for tenderness and received only silence in return. The human being is not born with hatred. We arrive into the world open, dependent, ready to love and be loved. But when that natural flow of affection is interrupted by betrayal, neglect, humiliation, or fear, the psyche experiences fragmentation. The inner world becomes divided between the part that feels the pain and the part that must suppress it to survive. The child who was mocked for being sensitive grows into the adult who despises sensitivity. The one who was rejected for needing love becomes the person who scoffs at emotional closeness. What begins as a defense soon solidifies into identity, and the pain transforms into disdain. Hatred, at its root, is a wound pretending to be strong. The wound does not disappear simply because it is buried. It festers in silence, feeding on repression. The more we avoid feeling it, the more it seeks expression through distorted forms. Hatred becomes its language. It is easier to hate than to hurt. It is easier to blame than to grieve. The psyche, in its attempt to escape suffering, externalizes it. The person who once felt powerless now projects that powerlessness outward, condemning it wherever they see it. The one who felt unseen now seeks control through judgment. Thus, the energy of pain, denied and unhealed, turns outward and becomes a psychological weapon aimed at the world. At first glance, hatred feels empowering. It gives a sense of control, of superiority, of being right. But beneath that temporary surge of strength lies a fragile structure built upon old fear. Hatred is the body's way of saying, "I will never be hurt again." It builds walls so tall that no one can approach. Yet behind those walls, the wound remains untouched. The paradox is tragic. The very thing created to protect us from pain ensures that we never truly heal it. Every act of hatred becomes a reinforcement of the same wound it was meant to conceal. The wounded origin of hatred can be traced in moments when emotion overwhelms reason. When a minor slight ignites disproportionate rage, it is rarely about the present event. The present simply reactivates an old memory, an ancient echo, someone's tone, someone's expression. Someone's rejection touches the original scar, and the buried pain bursts to the surface. But since the conscious mind has forgotten the true source, it misdirects the emotion toward whoever stands before us. Hatred, in this way, is misaddressed pain. It belongs to the past, but expresses itself in the present. Understanding this dynamic does not excuse destructive behavior, but it reveals its human truth. Every hateful act, whether subtle or explosive, originates from an attempt to avoid vulnerability. The psyche would rather burn in anger than collapse into grief. It is terrified of its own fragility, of returning to the place where it once felt powerless. Hatred, therefore, is the illusion of strength. It masks the terror of ever feeling helpless again. Beneath every harsh word and cruel thought lies a frightened fragment of self, still waiting for the safety it never found. If one were to look closely at those who hate most intensely, one would often find a history of betrayal or neglect. The person who lashes out was once someone who reached out and was met with coldness. The person who mocks others' pain was once told their own didn't matter. The one who controls others was once left in chaos. Hatred is learned when tenderness becomes dangerous. It is the emotional scar tissue of a soul that has forgotten softness. And because that wound was never met with compassion, it repeats its story endlessly through hostility. This is why hatred spreads so easily. It is contagious not by ideology, but by pain. When an unhealed person projects their suffering outward, they wound others who then carry that pain forward. A cycle of unconscious revenge begins, one that perpetuates generation after generation. Families, communities, and even nations repeat the same psychological inheritance: hurt that becomes hate, and hate that becomes identity. No one realizes they are simply reliving the same ancient wound, rebranded in new forms. The wounded origin of hatred reveals a truth that the mind resists. Behind every act of cruelty lies a broken heart, but not a heart that seeks pity, but one that was denied the freedom to feel. The tragedy is not that we are hateful beings, but that we mistake our pain for power. When pain is not held, it becomes hostility. When the heart cannot cry, it chooses to strike. The wound, unseen and unspoken, rules from the shadows, shaping our emotions, our relationships, our worldview. And until it is brought into awareness, until it is allowed to be felt without defense, hatred will continue to disguise itself as strength, while silently echoing the memory of everything we could not bear to feel. The human psyche is a master of disguise. When emotions become unbearable, when pain, shame, or fear threaten to surface, the mind creates masks to survive. These masks are not conscious choices, they are psychological defenses woven from necessity. They allow us to appear composed when chaos brews inside, confident when we are uncertain, indifferent when we are deeply affected. But among all these disguises, one of the most deceptive and powerful is the mask of hatred. It is the mind's way of saying, I am not weak, even when every part of the soul trembles with vulnerability beneath. Hatred, at its core, is not pure emotion. It is a mask. It hides what feels too fragile to reveal. The one who wears it does not wake up and decide to hate. Rather, they have learned that anger feels safer than pain. The heart that has been broken too often begins to armor itself in hostility. It learns to equate openness with danger, compassion with exposure, and empathy with risk. So, instead of showing sadness, it shows disdain. Instead of admitting fear, it projects dominance. The mask mechanism allows the self to maintain control in a world that once left it powerless. Every mask is a strategy of survival. The mind fears collapse, so it creates roles that can protect it from emotional threat. The mask of hatred, in particular, emerges when the inner world feels invaded or humiliated. It transforms the wounded self into a defiant one. It replaces helplessness with aggression, vulnerability with pride. Yet behind the facade, the original wound continues to ache, unseen and unresolved. The mask succeeds in hiding pain from others, but it also hides it from ourselves. What begins as protection becomes prison. In relationships, the mask mechanism operates like an invisible script. We lash out, criticize, or withdraw, believing we are defending ourselves from others, but in truth, we are defending ourselves from our own emotions. When someone gets too close, when they mirror a truth we are not ready to see, the mask tightens. We call it boundaries or strength, but often it is fear dressed as superiority. Hatred becomes a shield, a barrier between the heart and the world. The more we depend on it, the more disconnected we become, not only from others, but from our own authenticity. The tragedy of the mask is that it is convincing. It can make the wearer believe they are strong, untouchable, even righteous. The mask provides temporary relief from the chaos within. It gives a sense of control. But that control is illusionary. Underneath, the emotions it seeks to conceal continue to accumulate. Suppressed pain does not vanish, it mutates. Every unacknowledged feeling demands expression, and when it cannot find a healthy outlet, it erupts through aggression, judgment, or bitterness. Thus, the more one wears the mask, the more one becomes identified with it. What was once a defense slowly becomes a personality. The mask mechanism is not limited to individuals. It functions collectively as well. Groups, societies, and nations adopt masks to cover collective wounds. A culture humiliated by defeat may develop arrogance as its mask. A community long neglected may turn its pain into hostility toward outsiders. The psychological process is the same. The refusal to feel becomes the compulsion to dominate. Hatred, whether personal or collective, is a symptom of emotional repression masquerading as strength. But beneath every mask, there is a story the soul has not told. The child who learned that showing emotion led to punishment now hides behind coldness. The adolescent who was ridiculed for sensitivity becomes the adult who mocks compassion. The person who was betrayed learns to distrust love and replaces intimacy with control. The mask, then, is not evil. It is a sign of pain that was once too heavy to bear. It is the psyche's way of preserving itself when reality felt unsafe. Yet, what once protected us eventually prevents us from healing. The mechanism is subtle because it disguises itself as necessity. It tells us we must stay guarded to survive, that others cannot be trusted, that the world rewards hardness and punishes openness. Each time we listen to this voice, we strengthen the mask and weaken the connection to our inner life. We begin to mistake the mask for the self. We wear it so long that we forget it was ever a disguise. We forget that behind the hate, there was once hurt, behind the anger, there was once fear, behind the control, there was once longing. When emotion is denied, it seeks identity. The mask mechanism provides that identity, a version of the self that appears safe from vulnerability. But this identity is fragile because it depends on constant defense. The moment someone challenges it, the cracks appear. A harsh word, a rejection, a loss, These moments threaten the mask's stability, and the hidden pain beneath rushes forward, often as rage or despair. The mask does not fail because it is weak. It fails because no mask can contain the truth of human emotion forever. Beneath the facade, the psyche continues its silent plea to be seen, to be accepted, to be felt without fear. The mask resists that truth, but the truth remains, pressing gently from within, waiting for the moment it can finally be seen without disguise. Every encounter between two human beings is an exchange of words, gestures, emotions, and unseen energies. Yet beneath the surface of daily interaction lies a far more mysterious transaction, one that shapes the fabric of our relationships and the conflicts that arise within them. It is the exchange of shadows, the silent transfer of all that is hidden within us projected outward onto others. The shadow exchange begins where awareness ends. It operates through the unconscious, trading pain for blame, insecurity for judgment, and fear for control, until what is ours no longer feels like ours at all. The shadow is everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. It contains the anger we deny, the jealousy we suppress, and the desires we disown, and the fears we hide behind composure. Because the conscious mind cannot bear to see these contents, it casts them outward. What we can accept within, we begin to see outside. The world becomes a mirror reflecting our inner exiles, and other people become the carriers of what we have buried. We accuse them, despise them, or envy them, never realizing that we are encountering disowned fragments of our own being. The shadow exchange happens subtly, almost invisibly. A friend irritates us for reasons we cannot explain. A stranger's behavior feels intolerable, though it has no real consequence. We justify our emotional reaction by pointing to their flaws, yet beneath our judgment lies recognition. Something about them resonates with what we have suppressed. We feel the discomfort of familiarity, but misinterpret it as dislike. The mind cannot tolerate this reflection, so it deflects it through projection. We unconsciously hand over our unwanted traits to others, insisting they are the problem. This is the unspoken currency of the shadow exchange. It is not limited to negativity. The same mechanism governs admiration. When we idolize someone's confidence, creativity, or calmness, we are often seeing undeveloped aspects of our own potential. The shadow holds not only darkness, but also dormant light. In both love and hate, what draws us toward others is rarely about them. It is about the parts of ourselves seeking expression. Every encounter is therefore a mirror of our psychic completeness, showing us both what we reject and what we yearn to become. The shadow exchange is the psyche's method of communication, inviting integration through reflection. Yet most people resist this invitation. To accept that what we despise in another might belong to us threatens the ego's self-image. The ego survives by separation. It must believe that I am different, I am right, I am better. The shadow exchange dissolves these boundaries, revealing that the same impulses and contradictions exist in everyone. This is intolerable for the ego, which fears its own collapse. So, it doubles down on projection. It amplifies blame, strengthens hatred, and turns relationships into battlegrounds for unacknowledged emotion. What begins as an inner conflict becomes a war between mirrors, each reflecting the other's darkness without realizing they are reflections of the same source. In this unconscious trade, pain circulates endlessly. The person who feels shame projects it as criticism. The one who feels small projects it as arrogance. The one who fears rejection rejects others first. Each believes they are defending themselves, but in truth, they are perpetuating the very suffering they wish to escape. The shadow exchange becomes a feedback loop of wounded energy. What we send out returns to us through others. We cannot receive love because we have traded authenticity for protection. We cannot find peace because the projections we cast keep coming back, demanding to be reclaimed. This dynamic operates not only between individuals, but also across families, communities, and cultures. Generations pass down unintegrated shadows in the form of prejudice, resentment, and fear. A parent who suppresses anger raises a child who expresses it uncontrollably. A society that denies its collective guilt projects it onto outsiders, turning fear into ideology. The shadow, once externalized, becomes a social force. The exchange becomes collective, a shared blindness that binds people together in mutual projection. The unconscious seeks integration through repetition, replaying the same conflict in larger and larger circles until awareness finally intervenes. Awareness, however, demands courage. It requires looking inward when instinct tells us to point outward. It asks us to see that the enemy we fight may be our own reflection wearing a different face. The moment we recognize this, the energy of projection begins to withdraw. What was once external becomes internal again, not as guilt, but as understanding. We begin to sense that the people who challenge us most are the ones who reveal our hidden edges. The irritation, the anger, the resentment, all are signals of where the psyche still seeks wholeness. Each emotional charge points toward a fragment waiting to return home. The shadow exchange, in its essence, is not a curse, but a process of unconscious communication. It is how the soul speaks to itself through others, using the language of conflict and attraction to draw attention to what remains unresolved. Every time we are triggered, it is the psyche offering us a gift disguised as discomfort. The more we reject it, the louder it becomes. The more we accept it, the more it transforms. In truth, no exchange between human beings is ever purely external. It is always a meeting of shadows, an alchemical interaction through which the hidden becomes seen, the denied becomes known, and the unconscious finds its way back toward the light of awareness. The journey toward transcendence does not begin in light. It begins in darkness. It begins where confusion overwhelms certainty, where pain breaks the illusion of control, where everything we believed about ourselves collapses under the weight of truth. To transcend is not to escape the human condition, but to descend into it fully, to face the depths of fear, resentment, and longing without turning away. Only through this descent does transformation become possible. The path to transcendence wins through the very terrain the ego avoids, leading us back to the parts of ourselves we have exiled in pursuit of false perfection. The human psyche longs for wholeness, yet it spends most of its energy maintaining separation. We divide life into opposites, good and evil, love and hate, strength and weakness, light and shadow. These divisions create identity, but also confinement. The more we identify with one pole, the more we reject the other. The person who strives to be virtuous represses their darkness. The one who values independence suppresses their need for connection. In this way, we split our consciousness and live as fragments of what we could be. Transcendence begins the moment we recognize that the walls separating these opposites are self-created illusions. The first step on this path is awareness. Not intellectual awareness, but a raw, unfiltered seeing of what truly lives inside us. When we look inward without judgment, we begin to notice the hidden emotions and desires that shape our behavior. We see how anger disguises fear, how pride hides shame, how hatred conceals hurt. Awareness acts like light entering a dark room. It does not destroy the darkness, but reveals what is there. What once felt threatening becomes understandable. The psyche begins to relax because what is seen can no longer control us unconsciously. This seeing marks the threshold between unconscious living and conscious evolution. However, awareness alone is not transcendence. Many become trapped at the stage of insight, mistaking recognition for liberation. The next step requires acceptance. Acceptance means allowing what we see to exist without denial or resistance. It is the willingness to hold contradictions within ourselves without needing to resolve them instantly. We begin to understand that we can be both kind and cruel, confident and insecure, loving and resentful. This paradoxical awareness is the beginning of integration. The soul does not seek purity, it seeks wholeness. Every emotion, every impulse, every flaw has a place within the greater tapestry of who we are. To transcend, one must embrace the shadow without becoming consumed by it. This requires humility, the recognition that our conscious persona is only a fragment of the total psyche. The ego resists this humility because it fears dissolution. It believes that to acknowledge the shadow is to lose control. But in truth, transcendence is not the death of the ego, it is its transformation. The ego becomes a servant rather than a master, an instrument of awareness rather than an obstacle to it. When the conscious mind and the unconscious begin to cooperate, a deeper intelligence awakens, one that no longer divides life into enemies and allies, but sees every experience as part of the same unfolding. Pain, which once seemed meaningless, begins to reveal its purpose. Suffering becomes a teacher, guiding us towards self-understanding. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every disappointment becomes a mirror reflecting what within us still seeks healing. The path to transcendence passes through these mirrors repeatedly, each reflection demanding honesty. There are no shortcuts, no spiritual disguises that can replace the work of integration. The more we try to bypass pain, the more it follows us. But when we turn toward it, we discover that pain is not the opposite of peace, it is the gateway to it. The heart, when allowed to break, expands rather than collapses. As the inner and outer worlds begin to align, perception shifts. What once appeared as chaos reveals hidden order. The people who trigger us most deeply become catalysts for awakening. The events we resisted become turning points of growth. The external world mirrors the internal, not as punishment, but as communication. Life ceases to feel like something happening to us and begins to feel like something happening through us. This change in perspective dissolves the boundary between the personal and the universal. The self that once clung to its own story begins to sense its participation in a greater pattern of existence. The path to transcendence is not a straight ascent, but a spiral, each cycle bringing us closer to the center of being. We revisit the same emotions, the same conflicts, but each time with deeper awareness. The old patterns lose their grip because they are no longer unconscious. What once triggered hatred now awakens compassion. What once caused fear now inspires understanding. This is not moral improvement, but psychological alchemy, the transformation of emotion into insight, of resistance into flow. The energy once trapped in repression becomes available for creation, for love, for presence. Transcendence is not an escape from the human experience, it is its full embodiment. It is the realization that the divine and the flawed coexist within the same heart, that light needs darkness to be seen, that love and pain are different expressions of the same force seeking recognition. To walk this path is to allow the entire spectrum of being to move through us without clinging to any single identity. It is to surrender the illusion of control and enter the vastness of awareness where all opposites dissolve into unity and where every wound, every fear, every shadow becomes part of the same eternal unfolding